Alright everybody, how are we doing today? Social Democratic Association of America? Yeah. Clapping is so aggressive, so aggressive. Feel assertive, I feel like a man. Oh, that's my sense of humor. I'm a wacko. Anyway, that aside, there's a reason why I'm engaging in such levity. My hands hurt now. But yes, from Reason magazine, Free Minds, Free Markets. Does common sense gun safety legislation make sense as a response to the El Paso and Dayton shootings? The familiar proposals will do little or nothing to prevent attacks like these. Now, before I begin, I'd just like to say something. I have read the manifesto of the El Paso shooter. I have read it in detail. And it has been mischaracterized by the media, of course. However, his actions are still stand as being unacceptable. But his reaction is understandable. He saw how things were changing and didn't like it. And I will not attract any more attention than is due to it. I do not want anyone to be given I do not want to present it to anyone so they can use it to receive tips or ideas on how to do something similar. I just want you to know that the guy was fearful of population displacement, which is a very real consequence of lackluster border policy. Of one group coming in, forcing another group to change its location to make space, which can be terribly disruptive of daily life and of our economy. Germany suffered population displacement. It's crazy over there. Not to mention the differences in values and ideas and the way people think without assimilation into a new culture will inevitably create conflict. Hell, the genocide of the Indians. White Europeans coming, that was population displacement. Obviously, I'm not saying that the Mexicans are ever going to commit genocide. That's crazy. Why would they? But it would be an inevitable scenario if a large group did come charging over the border. That still does not excuse the shooter's actions, not even remotely. Rather, it's a damn good reason to strengthen our border policy, but also to make immigration reform so that immigration becomes easier, safer, and immigrants assimilate with American culture so that they get along with the rest of us better because they are more similar to us. Now, the most brilliant piece of dialogue in the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, and I know everyone hates the prequel trilogy except me. That's been my experience. I love the prequel trilogy. I do. And the most brilliant line of the whole thing was delivered by Natalie Portman's Padme Amidala, where she stated, "So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause." Now, why would you be applauding the death of liberty? Because the politicians will sell it to you in an appealing way. They aren't just going to say, they're not just going to brutally, honestly present it to you all at once, and then you're going to have the shocked reaction of, oh no! No. They're going to dress it up, they're going to spin it, and they're going to present it in an attractive fashion. They're going to take a turd, and they're going to polish it up and make it smell nice, but it's still a turd. But you forget that it's a turd because they made it look nice. And that's why you end up applauding it. Because they make it sound like a good thing. So, does common sense gun safety legislation make sense in response to the El Paso and Dayton shootings? Hours after a gunman killed 22 people at Walmart in El Paso on Sunday, Representative Veronica Escobar, whose district includes that city, implored all of us who have the power to end this horror to come together and once and for all address the gun violence epidemic that plagues our nation. Other prominent Democrats, including several presidential candidates, likewise reacted to the attack in El Paso and a mass shooting that killed 9 people in Dayton, Ohio, early the following morning by calling for urgent action to approve common-sense gun safety legislation. The elements of that legislation are most likely window dressing. That would do little or nothing to prevent attacks like these. The most frequently mentioned policy, universal background checks, is plainly irrelevant to these particular crimes, since both the El Paso shooter and the Dayton shooter purchased their weapons legally, meaning they did not have disqualifying criminal or psychiatric records, nor do the vast majority of mass shooters who either passed background checks or could have, neither requiring background checks for private transfers nor creating strong background checks. As President Donald Trump has proposed, perhaps referring to the same policy, would make a difference in such cases. Democrats also reiterated their support for a federal ban on assault weapons, and the conservative New York Post editorial page agreed that policy is at least superficially most relevant, since both of the rifles used in these 2 attacks would qualify for that label. The El Paso shooter seemed to have used a WASR-10 rifle, a civilian semi-automatic version of the AK-47, while the Dayton shooter used an AM-15, a semi-automatic rifle by Anderson Manufacturing that's similar to the Colt AR-15. The focus on such military-style rifles is puzzling for a few reasons. In 2017, all rifles combined, only a subset of which would qualify as assault weapons, accounted for just 5% of gun homicides, where the type of firearm was specified, while handguns accounted for 89%. Handguns are also the kind of firearm chosen by most mass shooters, whose crimes, it is worth remembering, account for just 1% of gun homicides. Now, the Democrats and liberals have created this classification of assault weapons mostly out of ignorance. A lot of these people don't even know how guns even work half the time. It's actually kind of amazing. Do you really want people regulating something they don't even fully understand? Like, seriously? Do you want to be ruled by ignorance? I sure as hell don't. I don't even own a gun, by the way. I think guns make you stupid most of the time. You're literally holding the most powerful weapon for warfare and personal combat between 2 people that has ever been created. That kind of power might go to your head and make you feel invincible when you're not. Just because you have a gun doesn't mean you're a badass. But at the same time, let's focus less on their words, the politicians, and more on what these actions would cause. Keep in mind, they're not idiots. If you can figure out a flaw in their legislation, chances are they figured it out too. They know, and they don't care. Because it's probably not a flaw. It was probably put there on purpose. Now, it may sound like a conspiracy theory, but what would gun legislation actually do? Keep in mind, since when do criminals obey the law? It would make it very easy to establish a black market for guns where criminals could just go and buy them there. Many shootings take place in gun-free zones because they know that no one can stop them because they're the only one that has one. In their mind, gun-free translates to no one can stop you, come on in and kill us all. All it does is place guns in the hand of criminals, police, and politicians. It does not make you safer. It makes them more powerful. I will quickly refer to you to Meiji-era Japan. where all firearms, swords, knives, guns, grenades, and any and all weapons were taken from the public. Mostly swords and knives, but they did have some firearms at that time. And almost immediately did not the Japanese police begin victimizing the people. Because that's all weapon control does. That's all weapon legislation does. Is it places all the power in the hands of the government and of the criminal population. It does not make you safe. It's security theater at best, and a violation of your safety and rights at worst. Even if Congress passed a new ban on assault weapons, more than 16 million would remain in circulation according to an estimate by the National Shooting Sports Foundation. That's an ample supply for the tiny minority of murderers who prefer them. But even if Congress could make those guns disappear, say by confiscating them through a mandatory buyback program, as Representative Eric Swalwell proposed during his short-lived presidential campaign, it would not have a noticeable impact on the frequency or lethality of mass shootings. Consider the rifle used in El Paso. Judging from security camera images, it had a fixed stock, which is okay under the latest version of the proposed federal assault weapon ban, sponsored by Senator Dianne Feinstein. The pistol grip would have to go, and so probably would the upper handguard, which seems to qualify as a forbidden barrel shroud. But you would still be left with a weapon that fires the same ammunition at the same rate with the same muzzle energy. One common sense gun control policy that might have practical significance in the context of a mass shooting is a limit on the size of magazines. Feinstein's bill, for example, would ban large-capacity ammunition-feeding devices, defined as those that hold more than 10 rounds, such as magazines used in El Paso and Dayton, but also the magazines that come standard with many kinds of rifles and handguns. As with the assault weapon ban, that provision would leave millions of newly illegal products in circulation, but if it made magazines that hold more than 10 rounds more expensive and harder to come by, it could theoretically encourage some mass shooters to use 10-round magazines, which would force them to switch to magazines more frequently. To finish this article off, since it takes just a few seconds to switch magazines, it's not clear how often this constraint would make a difference in attacks on unarmed people. But we can't rule out the possibility that it would occasionally help victims escape or resist. By the same token, however, a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds can make a crucial difference for people using guns to defend themselves against attacks, especially when they are confronted by multiple armed assailants. U.S. District Judge Roger Benitez emphasized that point, citing actual incidents when he ruled last March that California's 10-round magazine limit is inconsistent with the Second Amendment right to armed self-defense. California's law prohibiting acquisition and possession of magazines able to hold any more than 10 rounds places a severe restriction on the core right of self-defense of the home, such that it amounts to a destruction of the right and is unconstitutional under any level of scrutiny, he said. Writing in the New York Times, Sunny Cortland political scientist Robert Spitzer calls that conclusion startling, suspect, and downright strange. Yet it hardly seems strange to point out that the ability to fire more than 10 rounds without switching magazines can be important in self-defense. A point that current and retired police officers make every time they demand exemptions from laws like California's Indeed. The case for banning large-capacity magazines hinges on the same observation as the case against banning them. A few seconds can be the difference between life and death. I'm just going to say, plain and simple, that if it's unconstitutional, it's illegal. Gun control itself is unconstitutional and therefore an illegal law that cannot be made. Yet they're going to try to pass it anyway. They're not idiots. These flaws in the legislation they have to know are there. They know they exist. It's not about making people safe. They want you to think they're making you safe when what they really want is more power. Ignore people's words. Focus on their actions and what they get out of it. Always. Anyway.